session 9 is Mark 11, 1 through chapter 13:37. So again, lots of ground to cover, but Francis talks quite a bit about the triumphal entry, and he starts at the Mount of Olives and um, talks about what Jesus was kind of coming on the backs of before he kind of comes into the triumphal entry. One thing that really strikes me about the Mount of Olives, and you can kind of see it in the video, is that you can see the Temple Mount from there. And so Jesus would have, and like when you're there, you can actually see people because you can see the courtyard, you can see over the wall. So you can kind of see people in the inner court of the temple. And so he would have seen people making sacrifices. He would have seen what's going on there. And knowing that some of those people will change their heart to him and some of those people will not. And when we were in Israel and I was sitting there on the Mount of Olives looking into the temple, I just thought of like again that like juxtaposition of his grief for the people who won't and his compassion for the people who will. Um, yeah, so that strikes me about the Mount of Olives. There is just that view of the temple of like that's where people are worshiping God. That's where they're trying to maintain this relationship with him. And he sees that some of the things, we go on to see that he goes to cleanse the temple. Some of the things are keeping people from being able to have this relationship with God. But yeah, that's what strikes me about the Mount of Olives, and again, that's probably why they mention it in here by name, because people would know that you can see the temple walking into town. But yeah, so this is what the story we celebrate on Palm Sunday, and what were your thoughts on the triumphal entry?
Yeah, similar to the last session, we discussed the Messiah, and everybody's singing their praises to him but they still don't know what's to come. Like they are like, you're here to change things in the here and now,
the way we want them, yeah,
the way we want them, and the earthly conquering. And that's just interesting to me that they get it, but they don't quite yet.
Yep. And again, I just feel like that's human nature, right? Like we all get it, but we all kind of don't.
Yes.
And we have the benefit of like the entire narrative of Scripture, and they didn't necessarily have it. We still don't always get it, right? But and some, yeah. So you can have some empathy for the people here, but what's striking me here too is Jesus is calling out. I'm not sure if it's after. The Pharisees and the religious leaders are really in these two chapters are really trying to find a way to convict Jesus to kill him. And I think that Jesus calls them out, and I don't think it's because necessarily, and he mentions the religious leaders by name a lot, right? The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. And I don't think it was wrong to be a religious leader, right? But I think what ended up happening is that role ended up just corrupting their heart and hardening their heart to God and turning faith into religion, into something that was, a do's and don'ts rather than
the laws. Wash your hands before you eat.
Yes. The extra things that they were adding in to make sure they were asserting their own authority over people rather than guiding people to God. And what was initially intended to be that started to not, and started to, be corrupt. And I think we can all identify with that. There's a lot of that in every culture, in every generation. But, there's things that we do in Christianity and the Christian culture that may or may not be the right thing, right? It might be creating a barrier for people to have faith or come to faith or have closeness to God. Our expectations on people and what they should do and how they should act and what they should say and how they should look. And, he's like, I have a heart for the lost. The gospel is, I came to seek and save the lost. I didn't necessarily come to come for you who are not sick. You don't think you're sick, so why would I come for you? Your heart's too hard.
Yep.
Yeah. You want to talk about cleansing the temple a little bit? Francis doesn't talk about it, but I think it's worth noting here that, yeah, like I said, Jesus would have seen the temple walking into town. And what essentially is going on here in verse 15 through 19, yeah, there it is, 18. The chief priests and the scribes heard it and started looking for a way to kill him. But that the religious leaders were kind of altering what religious law said people needed to sacrifice. And so they kept like adapting what the sacrifice needed to be and making it more and more expensive or harder to come by. And so really sacrifices were supposed to be something people brought of their own. But then they started capitalizing the fact, well, people journey to come to Jerusalem, so then they can just buy their sacrifice when they get here. And instead of it just being a dove, like, let's make it something that's a little more rare and it's a little more expensive, and then the people who can't afford it don't get to get in.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why Jesus is mad. He's like, you guys are making barriers for people to come to me, and that's not okay.
Yeah.
And
or it could be these doves are a better sacrifice than these doves, and Jesus can see all of this happening from Mount Olivet. Right? Like, and they turned the temple into like a place of business that's taking advantage of people.
Yeah, and that's I think the point is, it's not necessarily that God's opposed to business. He is opposed to business that takes advantage of people, right? And that's not justice.
No.
And that's you had saw a quote today that said, "Forgive me for
desiring a seat at a table that Jesus would have flipped."
Right.
And so how often do we kind of sit in our high chairs here thinking like, this is where we're at, when if Jesus were to walk in the room, he would say, this is not bringing me glory.
This is what I had in mind. Yeah. And sometimes we do that intentionally, and sometimes we do it unintentionally, but that's again why we got to go back and ask ourselves, right? Like, is this true? Is this the truth, or is this something that has been made up extra, that might not be the heart of the gospel?
Yep.